welcome to Why We Are Christians. My name is Kent Philpott. I'm pastor of the Miller Avenue Baptist Church in Mill Valley, California. And we happen to be talking to another Baptist. Hey, he's up north a little bit, up in Oregon. And his name is Dan Nelson. Welcome, Dan. Here we go.
Good to be with you. Good
Yeah.
day, Ken.
And we've crossed paths a long time ago,
Yes.
back in the early 1970s when we were both students at Golden Gate Baptist Theological Seminary in Mill Valley. All right, Dan, so there you are, and you have quite a list of things that you engage in. You're an author. I have one of your books here that we're going to be talking about in the second program called Early Baptist, and you're a teacher, you're a dramatist. I don't even know what that means, Dan.
Well, that's without getting involved. I wrote a biography on George Whitefield, and I did a drama on him, impersonating his life in my church at Southwestern Seminary. I was a trustee there for 10 years, and did it in several schools and churches. So that's my drama. And I used to do stuff also along with that, maybe a biblical character in my church, basically confound to the church I was there for 35 years at First Baptist Camarillo, California.
So look at you're a supply preacher, a Baptist historian, interim pastor, and so very good. And later on at the end of the program, we're going to put up your email address so that people can contact you if they want to. You have 2 doctorates. You have a
Yes.
PhD and a Doctor of Ministry. I share the Doctor of Ministry, but I'm not smart enough to do a PhD, Dan.
Well, the PhD that was on the Great Awakening movement. It was not on the any Baptist movement. We covered some Baptists in there, but on the 3 preachers of the Great Awakening: Jonathan Edwards, John Wesley, and George Whitefield. And I gravitated to Whitefield with his tremendous ministry, and so I did write a book on him later, just sort of following up on the doctoral dissertation I did there.
So I want to go back and sort of start from the beginning, get people have an opportunity to know a little bit more about you, Dan. So you were born someplace in Mississippi. I think it says Hattiesburg.
Yeah, Hattiesburg. I grew up in Agricola, which is George County, between Mobile, Alabama, and Hattiesburg, Alabama. But on the Gulf Coast, where all those hurricanes come in. And so I grew up there in that little place, and I was saved in the church there. It was sort of the center of the community. So I come from the Bible Belt, and a lot of my relatives are still back there.
And you have 3 younger brothers.
That's right. 3 younger brothers, one in Florida and the other 2 still there in George County where I grew up.
Okay.
One was the mayor, basically the county seat in
Okay.
Roosdale for about 4 years.
Now, were your parents going to church? Were they Christians?
Yes, they came from 2 different backgrounds and really came to Christ as adults in the Southern Baptist Church there at Agricola. My dad was a Church of Christ, and he was taught that baptism saves you, baptismal regeneration, and yet he didn't have an assurance of his salvation. My mother came from the primitive Baptist, hyper-Calvinist background, which says, you can't really know you're saved. God's got it all determined, and it's fatalism, basically. And so they both came to Christ. My dad was a football coach, history teacher, and my mother, to all 4 of us, she was an elementary teacher. They both came to Christ in the church when we moved to that little community. And we just grew up in the church. My dad was my Sunday school teacher and was also very influential in many people's lives there for many years.
Right. Okay. Now, did you say your dad was a coach?
Yes, he's a football coach. Actually, my second book was on him. It was called Game On All the Time, Growing Up in the Home of a Legendary Football Coach. Yeah. And I just go through all these locker room stories. And it's sort of a regional book. I went back to the library, the county library, and we had about 50 people show up for the book signing. Went to some of the churches, the church I grew up in, got to speak. And I not only, it's a fun book. It's more of the secular book, but I got to share in a couple of churches about the influence my dad was for Christian influence. And so, yeah, well, he was a football coach.
I'm a football coach too.
Oh, great.
High school, I'm special teams. special teams coach for the junior varsity. What a
Wow. Well,
job.
our pastor at Chehalem Valley Baptist Church here in Newburgh, he gets involved with the community and he coaches football, basketball, and baseball. He's got three kids, three sons and one daughter, and
Wow,
they're
that's
all
great.
involved.
So now give us a little bit about your educational history.
Oh, wow.
The schools maybe you got your college degrees from.
Well, I got a college degree from William Carey College there in Hattiesburg. Got some good teachers there, and most of the students went to New Orleans Baptist Seminary. I had been a student summer missionary in Colorado, so I felt led to come to the West Coast because it's so unchurched in its area as opposed to the Bible Belt. And so I went to Golden Gate for about a year and a half. I did not finish there. I went back to New Orleans Baptist Seminary and got my master's degree there. One good thing about Golden Gate is I met my wife there.
I was going to say you met your wife there.
She was a nurse and was training. Had to have some seminary, a year of seminary to go with the Foreign Mission Board. And I told her that I was, open to that, but we never made it to the foreign mission field. But we've always been in California, which is the next thing to, I think, the foreign missions.
California's
We've
a
had
mission
Spanish
field.
missions and Korean congregations and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
yeah, that's where we met, and we were married there at Hillcrest Baptist Church in Richmond, California. Levi Price was the pastor. John Hughes was the pastor then. He passed away.
Yeah. Okay.
But that's where we met.
Yeah.
At Golden Gate, and then I went back to New Orleans, finished there, and I was contacted by the Northwest Baptist Convention out here in Portland about coming for 2 years to work with the evangelism director. The whole mission board at that time had given extra funding for youth evangelism, and I worked with Howard Ramsey for 2 years. It was a 2-year appointment. We did witness training in churches. I was supervised revival teams. That I had been in revival teams through the seminary and through Harry Williams with the evangelism division of the convention there in Fresno. And so that after 2 years, I was able to go to a church, First Baptist Church of Bernie, California, and that was for 6 years. Then we moved to Southern California, where I pastored First Baptist Camarillo for 35 years. And I got 2 doctorates there. The first doctorate was from California Graduate School of Theology, where I did my PhD work. And then while I was a trustee at Southwestern Baptist Seminary representing California for 10 years, I did the Doctor of Ministry degree, sort of worked the seminars and everything around the trustee meetings. And that took 3 or 4 years, but I got my Doctor of Ministry degree there. So that's all my education. I pastored 3 churches, a little church in Mississippi when I was going to college for 2 years, and then out here at First Baptist Bernie, which is close to Redding, up in the mountains, for 6 years, and then at First Baptist Church of Camarillo in Ventura County, which is halfway between Santa Barbara and Los Angeles. So that's the extent of my ministry and my education. My wife says, don't do anything else, because she says, you've already had all your education. But then I started writing.
Yeah. Now, one of the things that I've heard, now, don't get too excited about this, Dan.
Okay.
I've had people say, you got to be crazy to be a Baptist pastor, to pastor a Baptist church these days. Yeah. It is quite something. But that's what happens. Now Dan, I wanted you to please tell us how it is that you became a Christian in the first place. Okay. How did that happen? How did you become a follower of Jesus?
Again, it was around Agricola Baptist Church. Actually, the church was about less than a mile from where we grew up, and that was the center of the community. Some good things, bad things about the Bible Belt. Big thing is that everybody seemed to go to church there. We had evangelistic meetings. There was a missionary that his mother was in the church. His name was John Parker, and he had been in Chile. I think he was in Chile, him and his wife and family, for 40 years. So he was on furlough. He's preaching a revival meeting. We had these cottage prayer meetings, and I was about 8, I think, and I went, and a friend started talking with me about my relationship with the Lord, and I got under conviction that I was lost, that I didn't need, that I would go to hell if I died. And I told my mother about it, and we went to see the missionary, the evangelist that was speaking, and he shared the gospel with me, and he told me, if you really feel led to follow up on this, you just come to the front of the church during the message and talk with the pastor. And I did, and I prayed with the pastor and trusted in the Lord at that moment. And I know God saved me. It was a difference in my life. Baptized a few weeks later, and been in the church ever since. I have to credit my dad being a Sunday school teacher, being a really good influence. And then we had a pastor afterwards that was just a tremendously evangelistic preacher. He visited people, he witnessed to them every Sunday. People would come and just indicate that they'd accepted Christ by coming forward, that he had led to Christ personally. So that really influenced me. And when I was 11 or 12, I guess I came forward and I felt God was calling me to be an evangelist. That's taken more of a turn as far as being a pastor, evangelistic as a pastor. But I have worked in, I'd say the evangelism division with the Northwest Convention and with California, the California Southern Baptist Convention. You probably remember Harry Williams. Worked with him a lot. He was the evangelism director there for many years. So that's when I trusted the Lord. By the way, I was ordained, licensed and ordained there at the church. We had a little church that I was pastoring, just sort of go out on weekends, and I was single, so the Agricola Church had the ordination there, and so sort of everything happened to me there except being born. I was just in that church. Still go back there. Still great, solid church, and my brothers, they go there. So anyway, that's how I came to know the Lord and got interested in serving the Lord. I think He really called me because I was very interested in seeing people come to Christ. I wanted to see that happen, and I just love the Bible. Love to read the Bible over and over and over again, memorize it and everything else, and still do.
Now, Dan,
so that's the way I came to the Lord.
In the next program, we're going to be talking about what Baptist means. Where did we get that title? Where did that come?
Yes.
We won't talk about it now, Dan, but next program, right after this, we're going to, because I remember I didn't know what Baptist was. When I joined the military, I was in the Air Force for 4 years as a medic, and when I filled out the thing and they said, what religious affiliation, and I put Episcopalian, because that was the most status denomination in America. I would never have put Baptist. That's low. Yeah, so we're going to talk about what Baptists are. We may do it pretty quick. Now, so how about your younger brothers? Did they follow suit as time went on?
They all have trusted the Lord. There at Agricola Baptist, was baptized there, and are involved in churches in Florida. One brother, and the other brother is him and his wife. My baby brother just came to see us, by the way, 2 weeks ago. They sing. They're called Double D. They have a sort of a country music, type music. But he led the choir at First Baptist Lucedale, the county seat church there, and she led the choir and he led the music for many years. And he was the mayor of Lucedale. So he's been involved with that. So all my brothers have been in church. And again, our dad had a tremendous influence on us, and in many ways, a great moral influence on us also. So they're all there.
Did you notice any real changes in your life as a young kid like that?
Well, certainly, yes. For one thing, I got interested in the Bible. I was an avid reader. I've always been an avid reader, and I got interested in the Bible and history. But I did want to read the Scriptures, and I wanted my friends to come to Christ. And we tried to talk with friends of ours at school that were lost, and tried to share the gospel the best we could. Sometimes we'd lead them to the preacher he'd talk with them after we could talk. But that change was there. Pastor did a very wise thing with us. He included younger kids like myself in the service. He would ask me about what the Bible said. And he would have something I remember every Wednesday night, like find in the Bible where it talks about a white of the egg. We'd dig in the scripture and he'd tell us about that. So he was just really good. And he told my dad once, he says, you have a Bible scholar in your family. And he says, you just need to encourage him. And my dad did that. Yeah.
Okay. Well, Dan, so what year was it that you became a Christian? What year?
1960.
1960?
Yeah.
1960, okay. So as you grew up, about not that many years later, you encountered the Jesus People movement. Were you aware of any of that at that period?
I was so aware of it. I was at the Baptist Student Union in Perkinston, Mississippi, the county over. It's a community college I went to for 2 years. And I got involved in the Baptist Student Union there. And we actually were praying for a revival on the campus. And we were hearing about the Jesus movement in California. And what happened was we started a prayer meeting group when I was a sophomore there. And we would pray for revival, pray for people to be saved. We would study the scripture together. And then I went on to William Carey and started pastoring. And I thought, well, okay, I'll never hear much from the guys there. But they kept on, the ones that came back, and they had a prayer meeting. They invited the ladies. We were in a dorm room. Now they went to the chapel, 50 people praying for revival. And so they wanted to have this meeting, and they invited me back to speak and several others. And revival did break out. They had an all-night for God thing on the campus. They were in front of the athletic dorm. One of the athletes got saved. They even called the local news and said they got these crazy Jesus people out there singing, and they talked with the president. That was the time when they were burning down they're burning down stuff at college. He said, "Well, have they burned anything down yet?" He said, "No." He said, "Well, let them go. We need that type of spirit at our church, at our school." So Monday I came to preach. Probably the most amazing service I was ever in. The little chapel, they had people sitting in the aisles. And when I gave the invitation, nobody could come forward. I just said, just stand if you'll give your life to Christ. There was 20, 25 people just like that. And we outgrew the chapel. We went to the gym. When it was all said and done, there was 100 people, over 100 people that week that gave their lives to Christ. And a lot of it was because of the Jesus movement. Yeah. And that made an influence. That was an influence on me that I wanted to go to California because it was so many people that needed the Lord. And that's one of the reasons I came to California. So that's a long answer, but yes, the Jesus movement.
No, Dan, I love that. I love that answer because, we're rediscovering the Jesus People movement because of the Erwin Brothers film, The Jesus Revolution. Yeah. And so that's important to talk about, and I'm glad that you were a part of that, and your experiences were exactly the same as what happened here in the San Francisco Bay Area. Can you describe yourself in terms of a theology? We talk about different kinds of theology. Mm-hmm. I've been this. I'm sort of in the middle of everything. I'm no longer.
Well, I would say that's probably where I am too. I'm not a 5-point Calvinist. I do, in my book on early Baptists, we talk about the English Baptists, which they're mostly Reformed Baptists. I'm not an Arminian. I believe internal security and all that. There's just a lot of different types of Baptists, and if you get into the study of it, you will see Reformed Baptists, Free Will Baptists, all kinds of Baptists, even Seventh-day Baptists, but there are not very many of those.
Yeah, I've heard about that too, Dan.
And here in this country, of course, we have the Northern and Southern, and split off to the American and Southern, and then there's all of the independent groups. So I'm really for what Baptists were when they started, or as a movement. There's all kinds of opinions about that. Right. Some people believe, which I believe, there were churches like Baptists before the Reformation, but I think we ought to go back to what Baptists really stood for, and I see a lot of that sort of eroding today with some of the non-denominational stuff that says it doesn't matter what you are, And I know being a Christian is the most important thing, but I certainly believe that once you start studying the Bible, you identify in some way with certain teachings, and certainly I think Baptists have been closest to the Bible in my understanding of what the Bible teaches.
Yeah, I'm in agreement. I did my doctorate at a Presbyterian seminary, and I loved it. I had a great time, and I've interviewed Episcopalians, Roman Catholics, Lutherans, Methodists, all kinds of different denominations. And when you get down to it, we're really kind of all the same. There's a lot of sameness.
Yeah.
But the traditions that we get involved with have differences. And and so we're going to be talking about the Baptist history next time. Okay, Dan, now let me ask you this. What is your favorite book in the Old Testament?
I'd have to say Daniel.
Okay.
In the Old Testament. I like Daniel not just because it's after my name, but I like the stories and the fact that God used him, and he proposed in his heart that he would not defile himself and remain true to who God called him to be, And I don't understand everything in the last 6 chapters. The first 6 chapters are good, but I like the book of Daniel. There's so many books that I like in the Bible, but that one I guess would stick out in the Old Testament. Did you say New Testament?
New Testament.
Oh yeah, boy, it's really hard. I guess between Romans, Acts, and those and Hebrews. I love Hebrews.
Yeah.
Those 3 really stick out. If I had to pick one, I'd say Acts, because that's the history. I'm really into the history of the early church. I think we get a lot of our doctrine from how the early church lived, and all that. So I would say probably the book of Acts, yeah.
Do you have a favorite Bible translation?
Oh boy, I'm not King James only. I'm King James preference. I just grew up reading the King James, and I memorized a lot of scripture from the King James version. And people say, why don't you switch? I said, well, why don't you try rememorizing all that stuff in another version? So and I do like some of the history of how the King James came into being and all that. So I have used the New King James Version, but I sort of stick with those. I don't like the revised, and I don't care much for the NIV, especially the new translations. But I do like the King James. And again, I'm not saying that if you don't use the King James, you're all wrong with God, but I think it is probably a very accurate translation from what we had.
Yeah, Christians are all over the board about that. I started with the King James, then I went to the RSV, then I went to the NIV, and now my favorite translation is the ESV, English Standard
Yeah, that's a pretty
Version.
good one too. Yeah,
Yeah.
I've got all kinds of Bibles here.
Yeah,
and I sort of usually go back to the King James, and I've been posting on Facebook scripture meditations for the last 12, 13 years, and I'll do 3 new scripture meditations each week and put them on there, and I have another group on the MeWe network that I'll put those on too. And they all go up on King James.
Yeah.
That's it. And some people love that, and other people say, why don't you use another version? So I guess I'm right in the middle there.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that we study when we go to seminary, we study the Hebrew and we study Greek. And so we can always check the accuracies of our translations, which is a good thing, which is a good thing to do, which I do every time. So what's really, Dan, important to you right now? What's your maybe a concern, hopes? What's foremost on your mind these days?
Oh, wow. Well, I thought I would probably be doing a lot more preaching up here after retiring from a full-time pastorate, and that hasn't really happened. I didn't realize there wasn't as many Baptist churches. We really don't have a Southern Baptist church in Sherwood. We have an independent Baptist church. And so I'm teaching Sunday school class. Occasionally I'll be called upon to preach. My biggest interest right now is writing. I want to do a continuous history from present day all the way back to even beyond the Reformation time. And this last book that I've done is a doctrinal book, but also it uses all kinds of historical references.
Now,
So
okay,
what I'm trying to do is give an understanding of where we've come from and how that's influenced us today.
now let's take a look at your books. Now we're going to be talking about the early Baptist book in the next program, but I see one here. It's called Baptist Biographies and Happenings in American History.
Yes.
Okay. And so you talk about some of the Baptist leaders in American history. Okay. Another one is a burning and shining light. It's
That's the
about
biography
George
of George
Whitefield, the Anglican, First
Yeah,
Great
he's the
Awakening.
Anglican. But he had some of his converts become Baptists, and he said they became ducks because they lacked the water.
Okay. So we got that. Now here's another one that says game on the line, and it's got a picture of a football on it.
That's my dad. Yeah, that's what I did on my dad. I told you.
Okay, now what's that about?
Well, all that is the history of his life, how he influenced our family, but also through the years, I grew up sort of in the locker room, and as a little kid, I remember being in there, and I just got all these stories, and you're in this little small community, which is a very small school, and you know everybody, and so one of the things when I wrote the book, I just sort of wrote it for enjoyment and just as a tribute to my dad, and all kinds of people would say, "Oh, I remember that story or that story." You know, they'd contact me on Facebook, or even when I was back there personally, would talk with me about that. So that was what I wrote just as a tribute to him, just as sort of a fun book for people to read, and it's a really easy book to read. It's a very small one, but anyway,
Yeah.
that's where I wrote it.
Now another one is it says Baptist Revival, but I can't read the small print. What does it say, Dan? What is it?
Well, it's Baptist Revival. That was my first book on what Baptists believe, and it's reaffirming Baptist principles in today's changing church scene. Okay. So I take 6 things Baptists believe, and we try to analyze them as far as what they mean, and a lot of scripture and some history. And my writing is sort of unique in that everything I do to write doctrinally, I write it from a historical perspective. So okay. I was a history major, and my PhD was in church history, and so that's why I try to go through it that way. So that makes it a little different than just say this is a book about what Baptists believe. You know.
Okay.
I give some instances of it.
Thanks, Dan. We're just a little bit before we got to sign off here on this program. But I want everybody to know that we're going to be coming back with Dan Nelson. We're going to be talking about the early Baptists, where Baptists came from. And it's kind of important to understand where these various denominations, religious movements, where they had their foundation. What was that all about? And that's what we're going to be exploring next time. So until then, so long.